I could fight another man, I'd fight every man.
Yeah, keep it fair.
Yeah, I'd like to kill every man in the world. It's not a personal thing, it's his business.
So this is Grand Central Terminal is a perfect location to people watch.
Yeah, there's a lot of people here.
What would you say to people who call this hobby creepy and weird?
The usual people who call it creepy, call it weird, are people who haven't actually had the pleasure of actually spending a day watching people.
Yeah, the singer of Naked Park is a fucking tool as well.
You're not the first person I've heard say that.
He's just
The rest of the band are nice.
The rest of the band are really, really cool, but that singer is a fucking tit.
Under any circumstances, I'd kill somebody. Under the most trivial of circumstance, I would gladly take a life.
Platinum-selling glam rockers, the Glitter Band, were best known at the time for their gimmick of having two drummers, and are now they're best remembered for being fronted by a twatty-wigged paedophile.
So, this is Ian Watkins, and he's without doubt the definition of scum. Once the frontman of an up-and-coming alternative rock band, I think this man is genuinely one of the biggest pieces of shit of our time, and he's probably the worst thing to come out of the music industry since P. Diddy. He was a serial child sex offender, and his story is one of the most depraved things I have ever read in my life. And I don't just say that for, like, dramatic effect. I'm honestly very serious. Some of this is really fucked up. So if you need some kind of trigger warning or reason to maybe give this video a miss, well, there it is. Since his conviction in 2013, Watkins has been largely kept out of the limelight, and rightly so. Occasionally you'd get an update about him from prison, but all this really did was remind you that this monster existed and leave a bad taste in your mouth. However, in the last week, all of this has changed, with the very final update that Ian Watkins has been murdered in prison.
Oh no! Anyway, last week...
When I got the news myself, I promptly binned off whatever I was doing, had a celebratory pint, and then immediately started work on this very video. Without further ado, this is the squalid, sordid story of one of the evilest figures to ever come out of the world of rock and roll. Ian David Carslake Watkins came into this world in 1977, when a portal from the underworld opened up in South Wales and spat this grotesque little prick out. Growing up in South Wales, Watkins reportedly listened to a lot of American metal and alternative rock, and eventually decided that he wanted to form a band of his own. During the 1990s, he would launch a couple of different bands with his classmates that ultimately fizzled out and went nowhere. However, this would all change in 1997, when Watkins founded the band Lostprophets. This band did nothing short of blow up over the course of the 2000s. During its 15 years of existence, this emo band would churn out 5 studio albums, 4 of which made it to the top 10 in the UK charts. In 2004, with the release of their second album, Lostprophets were catapulted into the glamorous world of the mainstream. And by 2006 they were at the peak of their popularity and showed no signs of slowing down. Lostprophets' main demographic appeal were children, in particular girls from the age bracket of, say, 10 to 14 years old. There's nothing wrong with this, of course, unless your band is fronted by Satan's greatest bowel movement, Ian Watkins. It was 2008 when things started to go fuckways. Watkins was not in a good place by this point anyway, reportedly on a wonderful concoction of substances like crack cocaine and crystal meth. But it's at this point, too, when witnesses first came forward to the South Wales police with evidence that Watkins had some seriously depraved desires. One of these witnesses was Watkins' ex-girlfriend Joanne Magic, who claimed that he'd openly bragged about having and wanting to have sex with children, and to get them hooked on drugs as well.
He began telling me about all the underage fans that he took the virginity of, and he was proud of it, and how he abused them, and how his favourite video that he had was of a 14-year-old schoolgirl stripping off and saying her name and date of birth to the camera just before he took her virginity. And then he would just tell me about this super flirty 4-year-old, and how can she be super flirty? She's 4.
In fact, between 2008 and 2011, 6 different witnesses came forward with evidence about Watkins. Many attested that he possessed graphic images and videos, and one accused Watkins of assaulting her child. Meanwhile, the other bandmates of Lostprophets all reported that Watkins was getting more distant and difficult to deal with, probably partly due to the huge amount of drugs I mentioned he was hooked on. Watkins eventually demanded his own private dressing room, where it would later transpire he abused many of his victims. And just to be clear, there are reports of underage fans hanging out backstage at Lostprophets shows all throughout the 2000s. So we can assume that by 2008, Watkins was doing this prolifically and using his band's success and fame to do so. Now, if all that wasn't fucked up enough, it gets infinitely worse when you learn that all of this monumental evidence was basically just overlooked for at least 3 years by the South Wales Police. I mean, negligence doesn't even begin to cover this, really, does it? If anybody ever deserved to lose their job or their fingers, then surely it's the people that ignored this fucking evidence. In the end, in fact, the only reason that Watkins was even outed was because of a separate charge filed against him for all that copious amount of drugs he was taking. In fact, Watkins was such a fucking moron, he actually managed to get himself arrested 3 times for drug possession in June, November and December of 2012. On the 3rd occasion, the police conducted a thorough search of Watkins' house, on the grounds that him showing up places with a load of methamphetamines clearly wasn't a coincidence at this stage. And it's at this stage that the true extent and horror of this man's crimes were fully uncovered. Authorities found some 27 terabytes of explicit material with children on Watkins' computer, some of which he had filmed and starred in himself. It was so much material that it was several times larger than the entire data storage of the South Wales Police. Like, it's just colossal. There was a healthy amount of bestiality porn on there too, apparently there just for good measure, and on top of all of this, this was the password to his computer. I'm not going to say it out loud because somebody will clip it and have a fucking field day, but yeah, I think that gives you a clear picture of what we're dealing with here. If it shows anything at all, it's that Ian Watkins didn't take any of the heinous things he'd done remotely seriously. That just wasn't a thing in his head. Watkins was charged and reprimanded in custody on December the 19th, 2012, just 2 days after his 3rd and final drug arrest. Over the course of the trial's 11 months, the full details were combed through in meticulous detail. You can find the court transcripts online quite easily, and honestly, I would actually recommend not reading it because some of the things this man did are genuinely really twisted. I read it and I honestly had to go for a walk halfway through. Just to give you an idea, Watkins' youngest victim was somewhere around 10 months old. Tried alongside Watkins were 2 women who he'd managed to convince to abuse their own children as well as offer them up for Watkins. And just to add insult to injury, it also transpired that while he was awaiting trial, Watkins planned to release a statement simply saying that he did it all for the mega lols.
His barrister said he was ashamed and appalled by what he'd done, unable to recall some of it due to drugs. But such claims of remorse rang hollow after the prosecution today relayed the contents of 2 phone calls he'd made from prison. In one, he says to the woman he's called that he wants to put out a public statement, just to say it was mega lols, I don't know what everyone is getting so freaked out about. When the woman suggested that she wasn't sure that this was the right statement, he replied, "No, it's just lols now."
So yeah, this is clearly a man that did not show any remorse or regret at all for any of the things that he'd done. I think Slipknot's Corey Taylor put it best when he said there's not enough pain in the world for this man.
He's the most dangerous child sex offender I've ever met because he shows no emotion, he shows no sympathy, he shows no guilt, and in this case the evidence is overwhelming.
Finally, on December the 18th, 2013, the day before the anniversary of his arrest, Watkins was charged with 29 years in jail, which frankly in my opinion is far too short for a scumbag of this calibre. The 2 women that Watkins made complicit in his crimes were also sentenced to 14 and 17 years respectively, and I don't know about you, but personally I'd have just thrown the lot of them in a wood chipper. But then again, I'm not a judge, and I apparently lack the discipline to be one. From there, Watkins was quickly transported off to HM Prison, Wakefield, where, with the exception of one brief transfer, he would spend the rest of his miserable life. Even after his conviction and sentencing, Watkins continued to show absolutely no signs of regret for the crimes he'd committed. In fact, if anything, he was still convinced that what he'd done wasn't really that big of a deal. In 2017, Watkins was found sending letters from prison to a mother of a 2-year-old, seemingly trying to groom the both of them. And a year later in 2018, Watkins was also found in possession of a mobile phone, which he of course spuriously denied was his. So again, clearly a man that doesn't give a single fuck about the things he's done, but on top of that, this shows that this is a man that's never ever going to change either. It's horrific to even think that this vile, twisted creature would have been eligible for parole in 2031. Don't worry too much though, because based on recent events, it's very unlikely that Watkins is going to be getting that parole. There is a slight silver lining to all this, because as of October the 11th, 2025, the bastard is dead. And frankly, you didn't have to be a lost prophet to predict this one. I don't need to tell you that there's an unofficial hierarchy in prison amongst inmates, and those that commit crimes against the vulnerable, such as disabled people or children, well, they're at the very, very bottom of that society. So it's sufficient to say that Watkins would have had a pretty hefty target on his back anyway in prison. However, in recent days, it's also come to light that Watkins had a load of unpaid drug debts too, and that's another very, very quick way to get yourself bumped off behind bars. Combine this with the fact that Watkins was a very famous singer, whose conviction and trial had been widely publicised in the media, and yeah, to be honest, I'm surprised he survived as long as he did. Watkins was actually attacked before this in 2023, where he was reportedly stabbed non-fatally and taken hostage by prisoners for some 6 hours. I guess you could say that he was a prisoner of the prisoners? No, that's a shit joke. You can imagine the disappointment amongst inmates and guards alike that, after all that shit, the little weasel still survived. Good things come to those who wait though, and sure enough, on the morning of Saturday, October 11th, they fucking got him. He was attacked by 2 inmates who have now been identified. The details concerning what specifically happened are still a bit vague and tend to vary, but from what I can tell, he was probably shanked in the neck. And the 2 inmates either did it as soon as he left his cell, or they grabbed him and dragged him back in there and did it there. But either way, doesn't really matter because he was apparently pronounced dead on the scene. What a terrible shame indeed. Now, I'm not going to sit here and shower these 2 inmates in glory as I've seen some other people do. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that Ian Watkins is no longer with us and I won't lose any sleep over that, but you know, ultimately these 2 guys are in prison as well, and they must be there for something, and I've heard some rumours that it's for some pretty fucked up stuff as well. So I'm just going to hold off on that front, I think, save myself a poorly aged sentence. What I will say though is, you know, the fact that Ian Watkins is no longer on this plane of existence, well, that's marvellous news. I suppose 2 wrongs can make a right. As I've mentioned repeatedly throughout this video, this man showed the opposite of remorse throughout his conviction, his trial, and throughout the years he spent in prison. Not a shred of it was seen. I am convinced that had he finished his trial and been released, he would have gone straight back to abusing children without a second thought. Ultimately, the world is a better place without him, really. Anyway, with that brings us to the end of today's video. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I appreciate this video is probably not going to be as goofy and zany as my usual stuff. You know, some of this material was pretty dark. But regardless, I do hope you enjoyed the video anyway, and any support that you can throw it and my little channel is massively appreciated. A like, a share, or a subscribe, they go a tremendously long way. So thanks very much in advance. I should hopefully have another video with you soon. I've been working on another long mockumentary video, and I briefly paused that to obviously put this video together and upload it. So by the time you're watching this, I'll hopefully be back doing that. Or maybe I won't be because I'm a lazy bastard. Anyway, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks again for watching. Take it steady, stay safe out there, and remember, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and cider is made from apples.